All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Rosara's on her way. She should be here in a few minutes. And Catherine, are you ready? We'll give Catherine a sec here. There she is. All right. I'm going to go ahead and call us to order at 4:34. This is our August 22nd, 2019 special meeting of the Board of Trustees. Call to order. Let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. Pablo, would you like to lead us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Pablo. Let's do roll call, Catherine.
Trustee Baker. Here. Trustee Dodd.
Here.
Trustee Goff.
Here.
Trustee Baldini.
Here.
Trustee Rios.
Here.
Student Trustee Leon.
Here.
Trustee Segura.
Here.
And Trustee Iverson.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, adoption of the agenda. Do I have
So move.
a
Second.
I have a move for approval of the agenda by Trustee Baldini and a second by Trustee Segura. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Agenda has been adopted. All right, we're going to move to 3.1, public comment. This is general public comment. At this time, the board will devote a total of up to 15 minutes for comments to the Board of Trustees regarding any subject not appearing as an agenda item for this meeting, but over which the board has jurisdiction. The public may ask the board to place an item related to the business of the district on a future board agenda. No action or discussion will occur at this time on such items. Individuals will be limited to a 5-minute presentation. At this time, I will pull those in attendance. Is there anyone out in attendance that hasn't turned the speaker card in that wants to speak on a non-related item? I don't have any, so I'm going to open and close general public comment. And at this point, we're going to move to the 4.1. This is our presentation on campus housing. And I'm going to actually turn it over to Dr. Kraft. Jeff?
Yeah.
All right. And then actually, Trustee Dodd,
Yes, I have to
I'd
make
like
an
to-
announcement.
do you want to do it up here or you want to do it here? Either
is
way
fine.
works for you.
Oh, it's fine. We can do it right here. But unfortunately, I need to recuse myself from the matter. I'm going to have to leave the room. The Martin Group, I'm an attorney at Coblenz, Patch, Duffy & Bass, where I'm an associate. So as an associate, I don't have any direct financial interest in the matter. But out of overabundance of caution, I've spoken with our legal counsel and some other informal legal counsel here and there. I just think it would be in the best interest of that I recuse myself from the vote, and I will have to leave the room. I think, for once again for overabundance of caution. I expressed to Dr. Kraft when I heard the Martin Group, knowing it's a client of my law firm, that I had concerns that we probably should contact legal counsel. So we did that, and I think that was the recommendation from her. And so with that, unfortunately, I have to leave you guys. And I think for future votes involving the Martin Group, I'll be recusing myself in the future. Yeah, I wish you good luck. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Dodd.
Enjoy dinner.
My wife will be very happy. Yeah.
All right, and then I do have 2 speaker cards on 4.1. I have Laura, and I don't know if I'm going to get this right. I'm trying to read Sangio Kano, or is it close? Okay, and then Gary, would you guys like to speak before or after the presentation? After? After, okay, both of you, thank you. All right, Dr. Kraft, or, oh. Amy, is this on 4.1? Would you like to speak before or after? Chris? After? All right. Thank you, guys. All right. For after. So I'm going to at this point, turn it over to Dr. Kraft.
Thank you. Welcome, board. Good to see you. Tonight, we're going to really, the board meeting is really about an opportunity to understand the relevant issues with housing, where we are in the process, start to look at the selected finalists, and then finally, we'll be looking at the agreement tonight as well. I wanted to, first and foremost, kind of reiterate something that we've been talking about all along, which is it's very important for us to acknowledge a couple things. That campus facilities priorities, addition of remodeled classrooms, extended and updated labs, better infrastructure and improved teaching learning areas, additional student support and services facilities still are front and center for us. And so this in no way impedes those pieces, but they are for you to keep foremost in your mind as well. And our facilities master plan and our campus master plan certainly have those outlined for you. Let me just say that we've been talking about housing for a long while, at least a decade to say the least. It goes back as far as the 1980s with an initial report published in the 90s. There was an additional report published in 2008 on housing, including sales and lease options. They faded away in 2009 with the death of Dr. Chris McCarthy, but included campus master plans at that time involving funding streams, senior housing, hotels, and single-family residences. There were ideas for Lowe's Hardware, vineyards, apartments for student and faculty, and a Napa Gateway that surfaced in 2009 as well. Planning continued in 2010 with a feasibility study. 2012, the board asked for the plan to return as student and faculty housing. In 2013, the idea shifted to dorms and housing. 2014, there was another consultant review, coupled with a campus master plan and a draft initial report. That brings us really to kind of near term now, and we'll start talking about that tonight. 2015 through tonight really has seen a lot of conversation about housing, focused housing, and much of it has been kind of circling around the idea that housing is critical. It went from just a comment in the news to the headline in the news. And it's very difficult to pick anything up either by radio or NPR or the Register or Mercury News or the Chronicle and not find an article on student housing or affordable housing of some kind. We had, as we had discussed with you, and some of you attended yesterday and the day before, 2 forums. About 80 folks attended those forums where we presented information to the best of our ability where we are. We took questions and have captured those, and I'm sure some of those will be addressed tonight as well. Kind of moving forward tonight, as you listen to the presentation by the Martin Group and on the pre-agreement. Later, I want to ensure that in the next, should we move forward, our intention is really to engage campus stakeholders and constituents through a whole bunch of means, including, and I've just listed them here, online surveys, town halls, charrettes, if that is needed, through our board meetings, through updated housing website, a campus and community advisory group, president's report to the board, and then board updates through either Bob or myself over the next few months at board meetings. So there'll be plenty of opportunity for our constituencies and stakeholders to kind of weigh in on during the process. So with that kind of overview, let me introduce David Martin, I think, or David, from the Martin Group, who will walk you through. I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Could we also, just for the public and the rest of the board, introduce our council too?
We could, yes. And I would, our council, Sean Absher, yes, and the ever-esteemed David Kasnoka are here to help us tonight kind of unpack any questions that might move forward. Thank you, Sean. I wasn't sure on how to say your last name. David, if you wouldn't mind, you can take it, and they have a presentation tonight to walk us through. Welcome.
Yeah, if you guys want to sit or up the podium, there is a
Yeah.
mic there that you can turn on. It should work, right?
To advance your slides, you'll probably have to do it from here. Yeah. Or you can, yeah, that's probably the best.
Is that on now?
Yep.
Yes.
You're good.
Hi. Thank you, Dr. Krapp.
Oh, good.
All right. I wanted to bring some of my colleagues this evening and have them participate in this presentation as well. We wanted to give you a little overview of the firm and some of our projects, and then be happy to answer any questions. So, Stephen, you want to go to the next slide? So I founded the firm in 1984. It was the year, the next following year, I moved to St. Helena. So I've been a Napa Valley resident since 1985. And since that time, we have developed about 24 million square feet of commercial space and about 20,000 residential units, largely in California. We have really focused on mixed-use environments and community building. You can see from our chart that we have experience in all the major product types, and our motto from the day that we founded the firm is that we want to leave the places we touched better than we found them. I want to introduce some of my colleagues who are with me tonight. Stephen Seary, who's a principal of the firm, is currently operating the slides, and to my right is Karina White, who's our project manager. Her family has been in the Valley here since 1958 and currently lives in the Valley. Rihanna Schilling, who's in the slides, who's one of our development managers, is a native of Napa Valley as well, and here in Napa. I should go back and say that Karina, on top of many of her other accomplishments, was also a student here at Napa Valley College. So, yeah, another one of your students you should be very proud of. And behind me is Michelle Hoffman, who is our accounting manager, and Michelle's a native of Napa as well. So you have a lot of locals in the room with you this evening. Napkins, yes. So Stephen, if you'll go to the Emeryville slide. I wanted to give you 3 examples of some of our larger scale projects. This is a project from the 1980s where we assembled 80 acres of land in the waterfront of Emeryville and developed a mixed-use project of 684 homes, office, hotels, retail, movie theaters, public market, working with the city and really transform that area from an industrial zone to a mixed-use community that's won lots of awards. And we have an example from the 1990s in a project, it's called Hamilton Field. This is an Army air base that's based in Novato. It's a really interesting facility. It was in operation from 1934 to 1974, then closed in 74 and sat vacant until it was deemed to be closed by the government in 88, and ultimately was transferred to us in 1995. And we restored the historic buildings, refurbished the church, created nonprofit centers, created affordable housing, market rate housing, senior housing, and commercial and retail and hotel there as well. So I'm sure many of you have driven by the freeway and seen the Hamilton Field sign, but if you haven't driven through, I'd encourage you to take a look. We're very proud of it. And I'll use an example of one of our projects in the 2000s, which was a master plan we did for the University of Southern California. This was my daughter attended USC, and it was clear as a parent that there was a lack of housing in a neighborhood that was difficult. So I knew that she had a freshman year in the dorm and her sophomore year in the sorority house. So I had 2 years to be sure that I had built a project in time for her to safe place to live. And you'll get a sample of that here shortly. But in that process, we got to know the college well, and they asked us to master plan a 35-acre site that they owned, which is just recently completed, and really added a large amount of 1,200 apartments that were necessary for to house all of their students. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen and have him walk you through 3 examples of specific projects that we've done. Stephen.
Thank you, Board, for having us here this evening. I'll be taking you guys through 5 different projects, 3 of which are case studies that have been completed, and 2 of which that are currently under development. The first here is West 27th Place. It was one of the first projects constructed at USC off campus. It was actually the first LEED Platinum certified, which is the highest environmental certification rating you can receive. First LEED Platinum project for student housing in the nation. Had 160 beds and 400 bedrooms. The next project here was an on-campus development. It was financed with tax-exempt bonds, which is similar to the proposed structure here at Napa Valley College. 133 beds, or 133 units, 171 beds. This was graduate student housing, so mix of slightly older demographic and some families. Next slide. Recent completion for us was 27 North. This was the first private student housing project developed at San Jose State. San Jose State's been transitioning from a commuter school to a destination school, so it provided much-needed housing for students who predominantly had a very difficult time finding housing close to campus since it's adjacent to downtown San Jose. The rents are very high. Next slide is our project at UC Berkeley. We're calling the Durant. 56 units. It's 144 beds. It's one block off campus and across the street from the campus-provided housing. It's similar to a lot of these schools. You'll find that they're very undersupplied in terms of housing. UC Berkeley has a very difficult time in terms of getting approvals, and so this project we expect will be well received. The next slide is our Cal State Sacramento project. It's currently fully entitled. It'll be 223 apartment units, 790 beds. Similar to San Jose State, Cal State Sacramento is really transitioning from a commuter school to destination school, and there's a large demand to have housing close to campus. One thing to note just about all of our projects is they're all unique. As you can see, of these 5, they're all at different colleges, and they have their own different set of stakeholders, and we work a lot to work with the community and schools and students to listen and understand what is really needed in each project. With that, I think the next slide goes back to David.
Yeah, I'll just do it from here. It's easier. I thought it would be helpful to spend a moment and talk about the things we know and the things that we don't yet know, and that we hope to find out here in the next phase of this process. As Dr. Kraft said, we do know that the Bay Area and the Napa Valley have an extreme housing shortage and an affordability crisis. Our prosperity of creating so many new jobs in California, the housing supply has just not kept up. And as a result, housing prices have gone up, rents have gone up, and it's created quite a housing crisis. The things we do also know is that there's really 3 primary buckets of cost as it relates to housing. There's the cost of the land, there is the financing cost, and then there's the building cost. The good news for you is that you have, in essence, free land, as opposed to someone who would, in a market rate project, have to pay for the land, so that reduces that cost. You also have the benefit of being able to use tax-exempt financing, which is less expensive than traditional financing for overall, capital stack. So that's a real benefit as well. And the third, which are the building cost, is really what we hope to help develop for you over this next phase. So we can take the market research that has been done to date and develop a plan for you where we can propose a very cost-effective construction. The other thing we do know is that as opposed to market rate housing, no one is really in a better position to supply housing that's affordable than a government entity and yourselves, Napa Valley College. The things we don't yet know is the ultimate mix between product type, dorms versus apartments. There's been a lot of research that's been done. You're familiar with the study that you commissioned, and there's some additional research that needs to be done over this next period of time to help us better define that. We're also not sure what the most cost-effective design could be. There's, in general terms, there's site-built construction, which is what most people are familiar with. But there's also new technologies out today that are in modular housing that have gotten very sophisticated, very cost-effective. Friends of ours have a plan in Mare Island called Factory OS, and we've been spending time with them understanding the benefits that might be possible for using that technology here. So we'll be pursuing both of those options and trying to develop to see which would be the most cost-effective in marrying that with the design. And there's this whole question of all the other costs, fire protection and permitting and utilities, and that aren't yet known, but hopefully will be soon. So these will be some of the things we'll be working on. Stephen, you want to run through the timeline?
Yeah. So here's just a very preliminary timeline. The first column, 2019, labeled the planning phase, and in the pre-development agreement for your approval is called Phase 1. This Phase 1 is really to develop a very conceptual plan. So it includes selecting the basic team, architects, engineers, contractors that would go forward for NVC approval. Preliminary planning, preliminary cost estimates, very preliminary rents, and a preliminary pre-development schedule. At the end of this Phase 1, we would have a complete package of everything there listed above for NVC board approval. If after Phase 1 that is approved, we would move into Phase 2, which is the pre-development phase, which would take conceptual plans through schematics, design development, and then full-blown construction drawings. We would, throughout that process, work with general contractors to make sure the design is most cost-effective as possible and continue to get final pricing. We would continue to develop a more fine-tuned schedule for the construction and then also the lease-up period for the students to move in. During that phase, there's multiple government agencies, the DSA, the Division of State Architects, that would be involved. So we would be working with them. And then we would also be working with and on behalf of NVC to assist with any financing documents and managing the processes that would involve that. After all of that, then you would move into the construction phase, which would include contractor oversight, managing the contract documents, making sure that the project is moving on time and on budget, and managing the contractor on behalf of NVC. And then 2022 is the preliminary project completion, so we would assist with the project closeout of the construction, transition of the project to property management, and assist with any operational needs that NVC would request. That's just a very high-level overview at this time.
Karina, you want to take us through the summary of the pre-development agreement?
So it's good to see so many of you. I know some of you from here, from the community, and it's fun to be working on this. And the agreement tonight is selecting the Martin Group as the development manager. And pretty much what we call this phase one is the learning period. This is when we talk to all of the contractors and the architects. And I'm sure Factory OS is an incredible facility. I'm sure we could arrange a tour for any of you who wanted to see what they're doing there. It's an impressive program. And so that phase one is about 90 days. So we'll be back here, I think, around in December to report our findings on so much of that list that David mentioned is, here's what we don't know. And so we're going to go out and find out, well, how do we find the answers to what we don't know and present them to you again in December. And then that will move us to phase two, and that's about 18 months long. And Stephen mentioned that's when we talk with the State Architect Board for their approvals. The Martin Group will pay all the project-related expenses through that time, and the district can terminate the agreement, but there is a repayment of some project expenses that may be incurred.
Okay. So, in summary, I would say we've been around for 35 years. We've developed a variety of projects. No two are really the same. We really pride ourselves in customizing our projects for the needs of the local community. We have a very diverse experience and a lot of flexibility, so in allowing kind of the best answers to develop themselves through the process. I think we listen really well, which is an important part of this process, is to hear from, in your case, the students, the faculty, the staff, and the community to really see if we can accomplish all the goals, at the same time. We're great at paying attention to detail. The one thing about student housing, as an example, is you can't be late in delivering the product, because when school starts, you got to be able to move in, and so paying attention to details like scheduling is critical. We have a deep belief in alignment of interest and trying to be sure that all the parties have a common goal, and when that happens, we find that you get there quicker and more on schedule and time. And we believe we care a lot about community building. So to us, this is not just about building a place to sleep. It's about expanding and increasing the community experience on the campus. And there'll be a lot of software suggestions that we have to go with the hardware of the building that will help in the community building and the students' experience while they're here at Napa Valley College. So with all that, I'll be happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
We like to hear from public comment first, you guys, then open it up for questions.
Okay.
That work? All right. Is there an order? Do you guys mind? Gary, do you want to start? Good evening, Mr. Wharton.
Thank you.
I'll let Catherine get back to her seat.
Thanks.
Chair Iverson, honorable trustees, Dr. Kraft. I have followed the saga of campus housing planning at Napa Valley since late 2016, when I had an hour-long conversation on the subject with Dr. Kraft in his office. I am terribly supportive of affordable student housing. My family was surprised when I gained admission to Cal Berkeley. Even though tuition-free, it strapped the family budget with my housing expenses, what with the 3 younger brothers still at home. My Cal experience changed my life, and I realized that it took a lot of good people and wise educational policy to get me launched. Integrity. I want to talk about it. I'm steeped in it. I especially remember the time the top United States Air Force legal officer, the Judge Advocate General of the Air Force, a member of the General Staff, looked me in the eye and told me to contact him directly if I thought anything was amiss at my base. That was at the time that a lack of integrity in the officer and senior NCO Corps had been revealed by one scandal after another, the My Lai massacre cover-up being one. As a litigator in the civilian sector after leaving the Air Force, I learned something about the lack of board integrity when I investigated a Ponzi scheme that bilked hundreds of small investors of $150 million because a corporate board failed the integrity test. It hurts me to say this, but integrity is lacking on the board of Napa Valley College. Something is amiss. Res ipsa loquitur. The facts speak for themselves. Exhibit 1 is the copy of an email I only received on Monday as the result of a records request I made last month. And a big thanks is due to the honest Napa Valley College employees who did not deep six these emails. The public is grateful. On May 6, 2019, the college sent the following email to Belford Beatty, which it had selected 20 months earlier to act as campaign housing development manager. Quote, "Our president," meaning Dr. Kraft, "has informed me that members of our board of trustees are asking us to reconsider the use of a local firm as our development manager on campus housing here at Napa Valley College. While we work with our board of trustees to resolve this question, please discontinue any work on our behalf." No such reconsideration was taking place in public. The last reconsideration was discussed in public was in early 2018, and it got shot down heavily. At the February 2018 board meeting, out of the blue, Trustee Iverson requested a review of the second-place contender behind selectee Balfour Beatty. The identity of that firm had never been publicly disclosed. What made Trustee Iverson think the second-place finisher, if there was one, would be better? He never said. The next month, March 2018, an item was placed on the board agenda by Chair Mancuso, who supported the idea of reviewing all submissions, including one she described as a local, smaller company whom she wanted to bring back at the April meeting for a presentation. Why? She never said. At that meeting, Trustee Iverson characterized himself as a lone wolf among the rest of the board in supporting Trustee Mancuso's request to bring back the local company. Trustee Rios objected to reconsideration with principled integrity, stating, "The process is really not within our purview as a board. It is within Dr. Kraft's and his staff's to evaluate those proposals that were submitted." And that was actually done. And Balfour Beatty was brought forward as the most qualified at that point. I don't understand. To me, it seems to be a problem, and go back and reopen that initial portion of this consideration when it looks like we had our recommendation from the staff, close quote. The other 5 agreed, adding that unless something had changed to disqualify Balfour Beatty and staff initiated a change, the board should keep out of it. Although Trustee Segura would have liked to have a U.S. company, she remained principled and said succinctly, unless they are reneging on the contract or they have some issues or problems that they may not be able to deliver what we were contracting with them, that would be the only reason. Then I would revisit the issue. Also for my records request is Exhibit 2, an email sent to Balfour Beatty on June 27, 2019, this year. After reviewing the submissions to the RFQ for a second time, it has been determined that the college will engage the services of the Martin Group, a local developer whose president/CEO lives in St. Helena, for the development of housing on the Napa Valley College campus. I can't tell you how repulsive it was to read these emails. Trustees, plural, according to the email, for almost 2 years after selection of a potential developer, pressured the president to override the selection committee's merit-based decision. It is not merit that the CEO lives in St. Helena. That's cronyism. Since this proposed agreement contemplates a public-private partnership without any competitive bidding, the construction of a multi-million-dollar project, the law requires a competitive negotiation process. It is laughable to say that the process we are witnessing is competitive. These undisclosed trustees, whomever they are, and we will find out who they are, should tender their resignations immediately. Honor demands it. The fact that it was more than one trustee smacks of a conspiracy to violate their duty as a body, to act as a body and not as lone wolves, as if hunting prey. We are witnessing stark, naked cronyism. It must stop. I could make many constructive criticisms of the agreement under consideration, having negotiated many a contract. This contract is not in the best interest of the college. Dr. Kraft told me of his interpretation. I believe he misunderstands it. At this point, however, I refuse to engage in niceties of contractual interpretation. The contracting party is the result of a tainted, illegitimate process that fails to pass the smell test. The contracting party builds off-campus expensive luxury apartments not affordable on-campus mixed units found feasible by the college's own expert. And as an aside, the Durant is located on the same street where I got housed in college, and I looked it up on the website, and at a Durant, a studio apartment in the Durant is going to cost $3,000 a month. Hardly affordable. The stench of this project is too great. The board should reject approval of this agreement and adopt the successful process used at Orange Coast College and Santa Rosa JC. 1, direct staff to propose a new RFQ using concepts found feasible in the Skyon Group study. 2, have staff create a short list of qualified vendors from the responses to the RFQ. 3, then issue a request for proposal asking those qualified vendors to provide their proposals. And 4, evaluate the proposals, select the best, and negotiate with that firm. And that is the process that those other two schools use, not the mixed up process you have going on here, the tainted process. I will weep for the college, its faculty, staff, and students unless this board sends a clear message that it will not tolerate this utter disdain for transparency and lack of competitive negotiations. A process embracing cronyism and lacking integrity will taint the college for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Orton. No particular order. Laura, would you like to speak next?
Well, I guess it's good evening. My name is Laura San Giacomo. I actually am the administrative assistant in the Office of Student Life, and I wanted to comment on some of the inquiries I get being there answering calls and inquiries in person for the college. And over the summer, we had received many calls, people calling in asking about our student housing. I would say the majority assumed we had it. I guess they call other schools and they haven't, or they've been to other schools where they were, using it. I also would just direct them all inquiries to our website where we have a housing board. And over the summer, we only posted 2 opportunities for housing from local renters. And we had inquiries, I would say, daily. So definitely it was, hard for us to, service people with some recommendations. So we'd have to refer them to, the online boards for, looking for housing, apartments, et cetera. And I remember this one lady, the most recent one, she called probably every week because she couldn't find anything on the housing board soon enough before it went down. But she was coming from Nevada, and she didn't want to commute over here. She said, that's over an hour commute. I want to just, live, possibly work and enjoy going to school right there in Napa Valley. And I said, I understand. That sounds cool. I was able to do that. I actually went to school here 15 years ago to the viticulture area. I got my degree here post schooling to start my career in the wine industry, which I had a 15-year career there, which I was fortunate to be able to live here in American Canyon and go to an awesome school. But I do remember some of my classmates coming, wanting interest in winemaking and viticulture, and coming from San Francisco. I think one girl came from San Jose. So, there's people who come here for reasons that we offer to the public for education. I did take a little research on how much people are willing to pay to come and live here. in student housing, or just in general, actually. I got up to, people were saying up to $800 for a one-bedroom they would spend. And for a studio or apartment, it was around maybe up to $1,200. So if that's, any information that's useful, that's kind of a little bit of research that I took, just answering the phone and addressing the inquiries. So that's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Amy Martinson?
Good evening, Board. So I sent an email last night to everyone. I'm not sure if everyone checks their college email, so I just wanted to kind of repeat my request that was in that email. And these would just be good practices in general when you're approving a contract such as this, but especially in light of the mystery around how this, the original firm was deselected and the second choice was put into place. So basically the Napa City Council, prior to board meetings, the trustees, or in their case, the council members, turn over emails from the public where people were trying to persuade them to vote a certain way on an issue. They photocopy them and they make it part of the board packet. They place them in the back for the public to see. And I know because I email city council members and I see my emails in the back of the room. I think that's a great practice. The other, which I think is even more important for tonight, is that before they approve a large contract such as this, they each go around and make disclosures. They reveal anybody that they've talked to outside of a board meeting, any interested parties. So again, considering the email and considering the mystery and considering that, Trustee Dodd just recused himself, I think that it would help instill some trust in the public if each member before the vote today would go around and disclose if you've had any contacts with the Martin Group or any of their employees or any representatives or agents of the Martin Group before you vote. It's too late for Trustee Dodd because he's now recused himself. I still think it's important to find out if he helped influence what took place, because it's really not okay if he did influence the process up to this point and then recused himself now that they're at the point of being selected. Lastly, I encourage the board to reject this contract and to direct the president to start over with the process, starting just with the process that Gary Orton described. But just start over. This has been discussed for many, many years. It wouldn't take anything to wait a couple months to do this right so that you can move forward and have trust in the process and trust in the final decision that's made. So I hope you'll consider that request. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Chris Malin?
Good afternoon. Chris Malin. Thank you for this presentation. A couple of quick comments here. I'd really like to know how much the student housing is going to cost for a studio, a one-bedroom, a two-bedroom, three-bedroom. Can they tell us that tonight? And then I'd like to know what the Balfour entities cost would have been to the students. It really comes down to that. We need affordable student housing, and it'd be nice to know what that's going to cost before you sign a contract. And then I do support the competitive bidding and open, transparent process in selecting. It seems like it's a done deal, and that never feels right. It should be public and transparent. Then I was wondering in the college master plan if it seems to me that there should be no construction on the campus until you've determined inundation from sea rise. It's irresponsible of entities who are in power seats that can make decisions about building when and the inundation is going to occur much sooner than anybody ever thought it could. The lands here are going to be reduced because sea rise is, Napa River's right down there. The college, much of the college lands are at sea level. So seawater, brackish water is going to come into the college's land holdings, and it's really up to you, sitting all there right now, to be very wise and to make good decisions for the future of this campus. We are not doing as much as we should be doing to curb carbon in the atmosphere, and climate, where we used to think climate change was something that wasn't going to happen in our generation, we have definitely evaluated that, and we are in it now. So your decisions are imperative. They make a big difference. So if you're building where the sea is going, or the river is going to rise, then you're costing the public a lot of money, because all of that's going to have to move. And there's lots and lots of planning going around for that right now. I was here before, and I gave you some of the funding sources for planning for sea rise. Measure A has money for that. So, it's really a responsibility of yours to direct staff to find these funding sources so you can do the proper planning for the future of the college, given that you're going to have less room. So you're going to have to rethink, where your ball fields, where your tennis courts, where's all that going to go in relationship to the future of this housing project? So the Martin Group, if they haven't done their homework, they're remiss. They're remiss. They're living in the past. We have to live now for the future. We can't have this old thinking that we're going to escape this somehow, because we're not. We're not going to escape it. So there's housing going in down at the Gasser that's basically in the floodway. I mean, all of that was elevated up with fill, and so they're building on fill on a historic wetland in the floodway. So, what's going to happen there? All those people living in harm's way. There isn't a discussion going on in Napa. There is in the Bay Area, though. San Francisco has quite a lot of discussion about sea rise, and they're already feeling the effects of it in the Bay. So it seems to me that in the best interest of the students of this campus, that you do your homework. You should put off this contract tonight just for the things that Amy and Gary were saying, but really, if you're thinking anything about climate change at all, you would want to see where is the inundation line for the Napa Valley College given sea rise in the next 20 to 30 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you to everyone from the public comment and to the Martin Group for the presentation. I do. I'd like to go to the board and have some discussion now. We'll just go down this way. We'll start with you, Trustee Rios, if you don't mind.
So I do have a number of questions, and a number of them, I'm happy to see your counsels here, relate to the contract itself. Preliminarily, I'd like to say that I'm concerned about our timeline. I'm concerned about our process. I'm concerned about the timeline because of the acute need for housing. I mean, we've heard from many different groups and heard about many different studies about the need for housing, especially for college students and certainly community college students. We've got the legislature that has approved, or I'm not sure quite where it is in the process, but there's been legislation to allow students to live in their cars in our parking lots. I can't imagine that that's better than us building something for the students. So that's my concern, that there's a huge need, and I do want to make sure that we have followed our process, the process that we're supposed to follow, but I'm very concerned about just our timing, and that a 2-month delay is not really a 2-month delay, because if we don't make I don't know what the target year is, the 2022 or 23 school year, that's another school year we miss. So it's not just a potential two-month delay. I think it's a whole school year if we put this off. But our council is here, and Ron, you tell me if you think I'm out of my area here, but I'd certainly, I don't know what exactly the process was, because I'm not involved in it. It wasn't my place, but I'm guessing our council knows that whether we are, have properly followed the process and taken the steps we need to take to identify and then approve a developer for this project. And so I'm going to trust that we've done those things, and if we haven't, that our council it's council for the district, would let us know that. But I do have a number of questions about the contract itself, and I don't know if this is time for us to ask those questions. Seems council is here. Ron, what do you?
I think Sean's intention is to walk through. Bob has an introduction here, but then is to kind of walk through for the board the red line version, so you can fully understand the changes that have occurred, and then he can certainly address to the extent that he's able process.
That may be a better time, because I have some specific questions, and if he's going to walk through it, then at the time we get to those, I'd like to ask my questions about those things.
So are there similar questions regarding the actual agreement, the pre-agreement from the board? Would we like to go through that first and address some of these, or do we want to go through?
Maybe if people have general comments or questions
let's go down
first.
the line. We'll do that after. We'll just.
Yeah, I agree with Trustee Rios that timing is important. It's very important, just from what I've learned about the housing insecurity issue in the last 6 months. It really is a huge issue. But I also think a lot of our speakers brought up some really, really good points about process. I think there's some valid concerns about cost. I think there's some valid concerns about, are we really going to listen to the Scion Group and build what they suggest needs to be built to be financially responsible, but also create the best environment for our students? So I think we really need to make sure we're doing that. I have not ever heard anybody talk about the sea rise line. I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think that is a big issue. I live less than 100 yards from the wetlands, and trust me, I think about it. I think about whether my house will be there in 30 years. So I think that is something we really need to look at and make sure, if we move ahead, that our house, or whatever our housing looks like, it's going to be around for a long time and not, have to worry about it later on. I think that's a huge issue. So I'd like to see those addressed, and I think I got it all. Yeah, thank you.
Trustee Sugiura.
Thank you very much. I'm from St. Helena, and it's very nice to make your acquaintance. It's the first time I've seen and heard of you. And the concern I voiced on that particular meeting was that why were we planning on doing a contract with an international company when we could get a local one that would be thinking not only about the students, but the community as well. I mean, if you don't do it right, then, you're in the middle of it. And I know that you're a developer and that you've done many great things, and you can go anywhere you want, but I don't think that you would do your community and your students wrong. So that was the concern that I was voicing back in 2018.
Trustee Baldini?
I have several questions regarding that presentation, as well as, well, number one, if Dr. Kraft could bring us all up to how we've selected the Martin Group. And then I have questions for the Martin Group.
Sure. It is I'll try to do rather than a complete, meeting by meeting piece, I was just thinking about it, outlining it a little bit. So bear with me a little bit. We went through and Bob, feel free to jump in here. We constructed the RFQs. We had several firms respond to those RFQs. We met as a group, and the Martin Group and Balfour Beatty were one of those. I think during that process, Balfour Beatty, in conversations, I remember, emerged as a strong choice for us as an international company. They had breadth and width, and their presentation in the RFQ process was, we're 50 deep here, and we're 1,000 deep here, and we have offices in London, New York, Paris, and all of that. And it was impressive. It felt like they knew what they were doing. We felt we didn't know what we were doing, and our conversations were really about that. We knew less at the time about the Martin Group, and their presentation presented, as Rosada said, it was a strong presentation. Certainly, a local company was the reflection that knew what they were doing with plenty of background. As you've seen, these things were presented earlier on. And I think the decision to bring Balfour Beatty forward was, at the time, we really felt like we needed a big gun to address this issue. And as we started to walk through the process, so let me fast forward a little bit. So over the 2 years or so, 20 months, a lot of information occurred. One of you, as you've heard from all sides, the housing issue heated up off the scale here in the Bay Area, as I alluded to, and also locally. So the housing crisis was the headline. We had a lot of different speakers, as you'll recall, in the process, from different agencies come in and start to talk about the college's need to establish and do something. We walked through that process, employed the Scion Group for feasibility, and that was really as part of the process to make sure that it was transparent, open. The reason that we did not engage Balfour Beatty at the beginning was the board's concern that if we engaged Balfour Beatty and then they did the feasibility study, then it would be suspect. So we didn't engage Balfour Beatty, and we did not move forward with that contract. So we used a neutral third party, Scion. So that explains some of the delay timeline. During that period, I received an email from the Martin Group, a check-in email. Hey, still out there? We're still interested if you haven't moved forward, because we hadn't moved forward, because we had shifted and Balfour Beatty was quiet. We went forward with Scion Group. I can say for both with great confidence that no board member spoke to me about the Martin Group ever, nor was I ever influenced in that. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I reached out to the board, as you know, in 1, 2s, and 3s to speak with you independently without sharing your information with each other about the concept of a 724 service college, as you recall, the strength of a local firm who really knew boots on the ground, more about Napa building, more about regional building than I believed Balfour Beatty. We started to learn more information about, at this time, other innovative pieces, modular housing. Bob and I took a tour of a modular housing innovative piece. It became apparent at some point in time, I'd say, 6 weeks, 7, 8 weeks back from the time that, several months back, that the Martin Group felt strong. I think another piece that and large enough to handle Little Napa, our project. One of the things that we misconstrued in our first conversation was the size and scope of the Martin Group. In our first conversations, I thought it might, frankly, be David and a person or two, until we really figured out that this was a larger group with some depth. So my motion to move forward, talk with the board, go based on our local, again, I'm going to say boots on the ground knowledge. We felt, let's focus on the mission here, which is affordable student housing. So how are we going to do this? In conversations with the Scion Group, other folks on my staff, it was apparent that, at least in my belief, is that the Martin Group was going to be less expensive in terms of preparation, consulting, and upfront fees than Balfour Beatty. And I believe that still. At the end of the day, my suggestion to Bob, and we talked about this at length, was that we go with a good, strong local firm who would represent the college in a very powerful way. And it's no more nefarious than that. We felt they're both strong, and this was a good call for us. I guess on the other piece, you have other questions, but
Yes, a few,
yeah.
if I may. Well, good evening, and thank you for your presentation. Just a couple of questions regarding the Hamilton and Emeryville projects. Emeryville in particular, given Judson Steele and Sherwin-Williams and probably Stauffer and a few others. I worked for Southern Pacific during the 80s. I'm looking at answers for remediation and uncovering what was there and what you do with it and how that might affect a project here in Napa on our campus, that the potential for these unknowns, anything from historical sites to on a ... And then you had a similar challenge, I'm certain, at the Hamilton Field project. And then the question on those two further is, are you happy with the way they've aged? Given I drive by them today quite often. Looking back, are you satisfied as the developer there?
Well, let me see if I can take those one at a time. On the environmental question, I think we've cleaned up just about everything, including unexploded ordinances at Hamilton Field, which we found before our grading contractor got started. So in Emeryville, as you mentioned, Judson, Sherwin-Williams, a lot of trucking companies went underground, gasoline tanks, and that's all Bay fill, if you know, that the shoreline was the railroad track before, and they filled it in uncompacted fill. And so it was very complicated cleanup. And even today, most of our projects are urban infill sites, and we deal with the environmental issues on all of those and deal with all the appropriate agencies in cleaning those sites up. So we're very experienced in environmental cleanup and do it often. I don't expect any of those kinds of issues with the site, but you never know. You have to do the work, and if we find something, we'll deal with it. On the question of, am I satisfied with the way they're aged? The answer is not 100% satisfied. Knowing what we know, some of these are 30 and plus years old, and in hindsight, some things I would do differently. We have some projects. We did a building in San Francisco called One Market, which was the old Southern Pacific headquarters building that damaged in the quake, and we bought it after the damage and rebuilt the entire guts of that building and attached the historic facade to that. I'm satisfied with, and we did as good a job as anyone could do, and it's an iconic building. In Emeryville, the office buildings we built on the freeway, the Ginsler designed for us, I'm very satisfied with. Some of the residential, knowing what we know today, there are things I would do differently. That was, again, 35 years ago, and we've learned a lot since then. So hopefully I'm answering your question.
Well, getting back to the project at hand, expected life about 30 years or so.
Mm.
So driving by,
Right.
I like a different response, but I know things change and methodologies and requirements and
They
so
do.
on and so forth.
Yeah, if you have you would hope you'd have a longer expected life than 30 years, and some of our we certainly do. One Market's an example of that.
100 years.
Right. Affordability is an important part of the equation for you. And so it means that you want to be cost efficient in your design and in the construction materials, which is a little bit at odds with something that will last forever, right? So there's a balance there. Are we building a One Market, which you would hope will be there for generations, or are we building something which would be a more expensive solution? On the other end, do we build something that's really to maximize the cost efficiency, knowing that down the road, 20 or 30 years from now, it will need some, tender loving care? That decision will be yours. We can present you with those options, and as we go through down the path, those are your decisions, not ours. Once you pick a direction, it'll be our job to implement it, but we'll certainly give you options.
May I continue?
Yeah.
So in the actual projects that were listed, Cal State University, UCB, and Cal State University San Jose, Southwestern Law, varying, my quick calculations, varying beds per unit, and varying from 1.29 to 4.4 over 4.
Right.
That's after research, or is that, tell me how those numbers were arrived, and the Southwestern Law actually referred to as bedrooms versus beds per unit. All the others referred to as beds per unit.
Right.
And then the only one mentioning parking was Cal State University, Sacramento. And again, what triggered that particular number of 329? How do you arrive at that? Is that a necessity? And then some have retail. So again, what are those triggers that this is how many beds per unit, this is how many parking spaces I need, and let's include some retail wrap in there as well.
Right. All excellent questions. And it really depends on your audience. So if you take the audience here and the demographics of the audience here will have different needs than Southwest Law students will have. They will be older. They'll tend to, and so those units were really designed with more young adults in mind of going back, at law school. Many of them were working prior, and then were going back to school to kind of retool. So it's an older demographic than I suspect that we'll have here. You'll have some of both. And Scion, in their study, I think, did a really good job of thinking about, dorm rooms to really be most cost effective, and some apartments that particularly were students who have, families. There's a tool that we use, and we're designing these to be able to be most cost efficient. You take those things that are more expensive and try to spread them over a larger area. So a kitchen is an example. A kitchen is expensive. A kitchen on a one-bedroom, you're spreading that cost over that one bedroom. A two-bedroom, you get to divide the cost of the kitchen. Or a three-bedroom, even further. So you'll think about those options, when you're doing your design. And we lay the rooms out we think about the furnishing in the room so that you can get either 1 or 2 beds in a room. So if you take a traditional 2-bedroom apartment, that can be used for a family. It might be a student, so the adults can be in 1 bedroom, the children can be in the other. It could be used for 2 single students that each want their own bedroom, or it could be used for 4 students where you have 2 students in each room. Each of those are different price points because the cost of that unit, whether it's paid for by 1 family or it's divided among 4 students, it's another way to get at affordability and having, again, that 1 kitchen. So those are all the things you think about in your design. And one of the things we would want to do during the feasibility period is Sion did a good job so far, but we'd like to get smarter about the demand profile, the character of the students that are here now, and with your staff, the students that will be here in the future, and how do we think about those in the design. And like I said, a 2-bedroom apartment, and there's others, but as an example, gives you that flexibility of 4 single students or 2 students or a family. And which also gives you the flexibility as the character of your students will change, over time. So am I answering your question?
Yes, and then go down the line with the parking and retail. I see how that all fits together. So that UC Berkeley example of $3,000 a month that Mr. Horton cited is 2.57 beds, which comes down to about the market rate here in Napa for a bedroom.
Yeah, Durant's, all of our deals are unique, and Durant certainly was. Durant was a fraternity house that became condemned and was knocked down, and a Berkeley professor spent 5 years going through the entitlement process in the city of Berkeley, which is difficult to get a project entitled, and UC Berkeley is severely behind in their bed count for their student population, and the student population there is growing. And so what we did was once the entitlements were done, the professor decided to sell it, and we basically bought it and are building out what was already entitled by someone else. And so we're just executing on a plan that was already approved, as opposed to other projects like San Jose State or Sacramento State that we have actually designed and approved, from the ground up. You ask about parking and other amenities, retail. It's really very site-specific. As I look at your site from a very preliminary basis, you have a lot of retail nearby. So, unlike other projects we've done that didn't, and we needed to embed the retail, in the project itself. You may or may not need to do that here. Again, it's your choice. As it relates to parking, you have parking for your students already that attend. So if you live here, it's the same parking space. So we need to really spend a lot of time and understand what additional parking you need, because parking is expensive and it adds to the cost of housing. And could we lever off the parking you already have and reduce that expense near the housing, or how much do we need near the housing even though you have parking, and how convenient? We need to think through all of that. So there's a lot of questions to be answered as we go through the preliminary process, and the intent is to come back to you in that 60 or 90 days with our findings, our thoughts, our suggestions, some options for you to consider, and then have you make those decisions of whether you go forward or not in 90 days. And if we do, which one of those options should we be spending time on to execute?
And one more question, and that's it for right now. Yes. It says the Morton Group has no pending claims or lawsuits during the last 5 years. That seems like a short window. Can you?
10 years, 15 years, 20. Yeah, we do not have any lawsuits or claims in the history of the firm.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Pablo, I didn't skip over you. Do you have questions yet, or do you want to do follow-up after? Let Trustee Baker go, or?
I didn't really have any questions, but I did have a comment just in regards to the project as a whole. I do really like the idea of a housing project. I'm thinking that it combats the housing insecurities that we see in California. As Trustee Rios mentioned, this takes Napa Valley College and it puts it ahead of the legislation, ahead of AB 302. And I do want to see that. I want to see us as a college, us as a community, moving forward and really doing something for the students here and the community at large. I do think that the Scion study mentioned that there was the majority of students would like to see ranges, price ranges between $750 and $1,150. Whether that's something that we can actually accomplish. I trust that the college leaders and the community leaders involved in moving forward with this sort of project will definitely keep students in mind. And I trust that when this project is built, that is the rate and they'll be affordable for students to really have the ability to have a place in Napa to stay and study.
Thank you. Trustee Baker.
I have a few questions, but they all kind of converge on one thing. And one of the things that's really been, I keep hearing at all the presentations that we've had and that I've attended, that there are multiple places within this process where we could say, no. And I just want to be really clear, on some of the things that I have questions about, whether or not those are things that would, because one of the comments that was made in the presentation was about how, yeah, we can back out, but we'd be liable for costs that were incurred. So I just want to find out, during the process, if you determine that $750 for a one bed or $1,200 for a studio is just not doable. Or if we do have some environmental issues, and I would really like to see the sea rise question even addressed as a part of the study that you do. It's like, if that comes back, that it's not feasible financially, or if it's not feasible because we're going to be underwater, where in the timeline do we have those options to pull out, and what would our liability be if that happened?
Well, in the agreement that's in front of you now, there's a phase one, which is the next 90 days where a lot of this work will be done. During that time, there is no cost to you for any of our time, so it's contributed in the process. The only and there's a limit to third-party costs at $50,000, and so those funds would be available to pay someone to address the issue of environmental assessment. Let's take an initial look, it's called a phase one, and to see if there's anything in the site we need to worry about around the question of the sea rise and the elevations and what are the floodplain issues associated, with the site. So, and to an architect to do some quick studies and sketches so that we can present options and then get bids back from the contractor. So the total exposure to the college between now and the end of the year is $50,000, and that all goes to third-party folks and with the information that whether you decide to go forward with us or not is still yours and available for you, who you ever decide to go forward with. Is that answering your question?
I think so. So it's $50,000 total, correct?
Total, not to exceed.
If we had something like the sea rise issue that was not necessarily on the table when we first started the conversation, and then it's going to be an additional $10,000 over that 50 that's already been spent, what would the process be? Would you come back and we could approve additional funds to do that work still within the limit of the contract?
Right. We'll be working with staff on a constant basis, and if there's important information that the staff believes or the board believes that you need to have, and the cost of that exceeds $50,000, it has to come back to you for your approval.
And Oh, I did have one other question about just the different types of, the case studies that you presented. All but one of them was privately financed. There was one that
Right.
was tax exempt bonds. Do you have other things in your portfolio that have been tax exempt bond funded?
There have been, yes, but that was the only one that we have done that is in kind of current day and student housing. So a lot of the projects, a lot of the universities we work with are either don't have the capital or they do not want to take the financial obligations involved in bonds, so they prefer to have us put up the money. And they believe they're in the education business, not the housing business, and so they want to push the risk back to a private party like us. So we're willing to take that risk because that's our business. We understand it, and we'll take the responsibility for that and put up all the capital for that and take all the financial obligations that are associated with it. That's more of what we do. So we make those decisions on our own behalf. And when we talked to your staff, we presented both of those options to your staff, that we were willing to do either. And I understand the staff's more comfortable with the tax-exempt bond structure. And in that structure, just to be clear, we have no ownership at all in the project. We're just the hired help. We're working for you to help get it executed so that you own it, and it will be owned through a 501c3, but effectively it'll be under, the college control. That help?
I have a couple questions, but I think we should probably jump into the contract questions first.
Well, I think whenever it is we go through it is, I'm expecting to.
All right. My question would be related just to like the cost of building materials and stuff. I mean, no one has a crystal ball, but if we were to hit a recession or something, or the trade tariffs, and how does that, I mean, what kind of assurances can be made on that side?
Well,
Just one of the risks of the project? And
it is, yeah. And so the guys who own Factory OS are friends of mine. We've done a lot of projects together. Your staff has had a chance to tour. It's helpful there because it's in a factory and therefore it's more controllable. They have a long-term contract with the unions, and it's for framers, and they have a long-term contract on wood, which is a large part of the cost of the buildings. It's right here in Mare Island. One of the big issues with modular is transportation cost. We finished a 250-unit project at the Union City BART station that was built in Boise, Idaho, and shipped down here, and a big expense is transportation. What's nice here is you have Factory OS right in your backyard. They're very cost-effective, and it's union labor, and it will allow us to have less variable issues around cost than if we're. But that's one option. The other option is traditional stick frame ground up, and in that case we would go to contractors with our initial plans and ask them for estimates that we would certainly share with you. We usually go to multiple contractors, so we keep everybody honest. But until you have a full set of plans, with all the details, it's called a guaranteed max contract. When you get a full set of plans, you can pick a contractor, negotiate, and until you sign that, you really, don't sleep at night until that's really when the costs are nailed down. The nice thing about the factory is because they're building these modulars constantly, that timing collapses, so we can get to there quicker if the board decides that's a path that they'd like to achieve.
What's the lifespan? I'm sorry for jumping in. The lifespan of a modular does it last?
Oh yeah. Modular construction. Well, it's come a long way over the years, and today modular construction, like Factory OS is doing, they're actually better built than we can build on site, because they have to be built to withstand the impact of transit, which is roughly an 8.5 earthquake, because they're going down the road on those trailers. So you've got in a traditional, if I'm getting too much detail, stop me. But when you're building on site, the floor of the top unit supports the roof of the lower unit when you build on site. When you're building in a factory, all 4 sides are built and then they're delivered. So you actually have doubled up on the quality because you get better sound treatment because you got a 1-inch air gap between units and between floors, and they're structurally superior to site built, but they're also less expensive. So there's a lot of arguably better quality and less expensive at the same time, which is why it's worth, a look.
Get into that, yeah. Okay.
The one limitation to modular is that it has to be a size that you can transport down the freeway, and that limits, if you wanted a large open space, it doesn't work very well. But for student housing, it's a perfect size when you lay out the plans. And if we needed a larger room for a bigger community room, we would do that site built and then use the modular for the residential units.
Or you could float it up here on the Napa River in any scenario.
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other questions to the Martin Group on the presentation? All right, okay, so we are going to move to our action items. This is 5.1. This is the campus housing pre-development agreement, and turn it over to you, Mr. Parker.
Well, thank you. And so when we entered into this negotiation, we reached out. We have a long-standing relationship with our law firm in San Francisco. Those of you who have been on the board for a while, I'm sure recognize David Kaznoka, who has been here on occasion as our bond counsel, so advising us on our general obligation bonds. So we reached out to the firm to help us negotiate this pre-development agreement with the Martin Group, and Sean Absher is here tonight to talk about the pre-development agreement. There were some recent changes, updates to the pre-development agreement based on some negotiation with the Martin Group, as well as some questions that came in from the board. And so Sean is here to walk us through the changes. That most recent version was uploaded to board docs earlier today. But Sean is here to walk us through those changes and then also answer any questions that you might have about the pre-development agreement overall. So I'll turn the podium over to Sean.
Thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here. Catherine, do I need to hit anything, or are you? Most of these changes that you see.
Sean, could we raise the podium a little bit? And maybe if you could speak into the mic, please. Sorry.
Okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Good.
Much better.
It's a pleasure to be here, and it's been a pleasure working with staff on this agreement along with the Martin Group. And the Martin Group was represented by their legal counsel, Joshua Steinhauser, at the Koblenz firm. The changes that you have are, in my opinion, largely cleanup, and I'd like to go through them. The first is identifying the legal name of the district, rather than Napa Valley College, Napa Valley Community College District. The next change to the document is on page 2. In section A, for little I. This change was requested by the Martin Group and I think was reasonable. This was simply to acknowledge that as the Martin Group goes through its feasibility preliminary analysis, the parties understand that there may be a need for flexibility in achieving the goals related to the project. Section B, you'll see there's a change. This was a change really working with district staff and anticipating that the next board meeting where Martin Group's preliminary analysis feasibility could be considered would be at the board's December 12th meeting. So the idea was to create this ladder of 90 days from the effective date of the agreement or December 2 as a date for completion of the first phase preliminary analysis feasibility study. Going down in section B, you'll see there's a strikeout of the cap limit for preliminary design fee. That was done to reflect that if the college decides to proceed with the project, the $50,000 cap that David Martin mentioned doesn't apply. And the reason for that is if the district decides not to proceed with the project after phase one, then the liability limit is $50,000. If the district decides to proceed, then the preliminary analysis fee becomes a part of the overall expenses and fees that the Martin Group has incurred, and those would be paid upon financial closing. And financial closing is defined in the agreement as the closing on the 501c3 financing.
Can I stop you there for a second? Because I had a couple of questions about this, the cap. I want to be clear. So the cap applies, it's $50,000 if after the first phase we don't move forward. That's all that we're liable for is the $50,000.
Correct.
And if we do move forward, then this also relates to the sub-consultants, I think that they're named here, that there's some language that says that if there are any sub-consultants that their expense is going to be $50,000 or more, those are going to come back for approval. Now, where do those fit in? Are those in the first phase, if their expenses, they have sub-consultants that are going to be more than $50,000, are we going to be liable for those in the first phase?
Your liability in the first phase, whether it's consultants, sub-consultants, that's $50,000. I can go to it right now and then come back. If you go to section D, this is where you see the reference to the changes made to the approval rights the district has for the Martin Group's consultants and sub-consultants. This is a large project. There's a lot of complexity to it, as everybody knows. The Martin Group is going to be working with a lot of consultants, a lot of sub-consultants. So as a matter of efficiency, the idea, and again, this is something that the Martin Group asked for, seemed reasonable, was if there's a consultant, sub-consultant that the Martin Group believes is needed for the project, then the district approves the retention of those consultants, sub-consultants, if it's anticipated the cost of their services is going to be more than $50,000. For those consultants, sub-consultants where the anticipated fees are below $50,000, the district doesn't approve those consultants, sub-consultants, but the district is told who those consultants, sub-consultants are. So Section D was an effort to make the process a bit more efficient from the Martin Group standpoint, because there would be so many consultants involved, and the idea of every consultant, sub-consultant literally being approved by the board just seemed to be a bit burdensome. So that's why you see the $50,000 reference in D. So it doesn't, the $50,000 in Section D doesn't directly relate to the concept of the fee cap on Phase 1 or the district's exposure to the pre-development expenses or the pre-development fees.
So in Phase 1, why would we need to approve them then? If that's a Phase 1 and we didn't move
I think it's
forward?
important because the district wants to have a lot of involvement in making sure this project meets its goals and objectives. And the selection of consultants, especially consultants that are deemed significant, and by definition that would be a consultant that's in excess of $50,000, it was important to know who those consultants are, just for independent due diligence if the district wanted to do that. It'd be no different than wanting to know, for example, who the architect might be, who the CEQA consultant might be. Those are all subcontractors or consultants where you can anticipate their fees would be in excess of $50,000. So that was the thought process for that.
And another question, I may be making you jump around, I apologize, but it's related to the preliminary work and the costs associated with that. And this is on page 5, section 6, where it talks about, it says in that paragraph A, pre-development expenses include without limitation certain expenses incurred by Martin Group directly related to the project prior to the effective date of this agreement and that are not associated with the Martin Group's pursuit of the project award. Why would we reimburse for costs that are not associated with the pursuit of the project? Am I reading that wrong?
Well, I can tell you what I think it means, and then we can decide if you are reading it wrong or not. The Martin Group submitted a proposal to the RFQ as reflected in the recital. And so there was costs and expenses incurred by the Martin Group related to the pursuit of the award of the project. And then there's costs and expenses the Martin Group incurred independent of the award just related to the project itself. So the idea here is to make clear that the definition of pre-development expenses are those expenses that actually go toward an analysis of the project itself. So that was intended to just clarify what would be considered pre-development expenses. Did that answer your question?
No, then I may not be reading this right, but I'm a little confused about that because it says that it's going to include those expenses directly related to the project and the expenses that are not associated. Isn't that what that says?
Right. That's how I understand it. It's not allowing for pre-development expenses to include expenses that are related to the procurement of the award versus pre-development expenses that are related to the services that are being provided. So if you look at the agreement and if you go to Exhibit, I believe it's Exhibit B, I think this will help. Exhibit B is the list of pre-development services that the Martin Group is providing under this document.
Yes, I saw that, but I think, and maybe it's a punctuation thing, or maybe there are words missing. To me, I think this is incorrect, because that "and" is conjunctive. It says it includes these expenses, and it includes those that are not associated with the pursuit of the project. So shouldn't that say, but does not include, or some other phrasing?
Perhaps that could be cleaned up. If there's ambiguity, then I think we should fix that.
I think there
that
is.
Can be done.
So I apologize for hammering on that, but it doesn't read right to me.
Okay, no, I think we should fix that then, and there's an easy way to do that.
So, like I said, I think I made you jump around, and maybe when we get to the next portion, I've got just a couple of other questions on this.
So going back to 1C, this change, you'll see that the word negotiate was stricken. So the way the sentence now reads is, upon the district's approval of the preliminary analysis in its sole discretion and based thereon, the parties will in good faith finalize a preliminary pre-development project development schedule. That change was made primarily to emphasize that, now again, this is phase 2, so phase 1's done, and the parties have agreed to move forward with phase 2 after phase 1. So at that point, there's a meeting of the minds in terms of all the preliminary analysis, all of the feasibility. So this change was made to better reflect that the parties are going to work in good faith to enter into a pre-development agreement. That doesn't mean that the district's committing itself to actually enter into a pre-development agreement. If you go further down the document, you'll see that if it states if the parties are unable to reach agreement, then this agreement shall terminate. So the sequence is there's phase one, preliminary analysis, feasibility. If that's successful, the parties need to actually negotiate an amendment to this document to reflect the work product that was derived from phase one. And that work product is very important because it addresses preliminarily the issue of feasibility, both from a construction as well as a financing standpoint. And it also starts to hone in on some of the questions the board has had about unit size, cost, and some of the land use, environmental issues. So that's a significant step in this, under this document, and the idea again is that the parties then are really committing themselves in an effort to move the project forward. We talked about D. Let me go to the next change. That's on page 6. This is under the heading you'll see default by district. So this is a situation where you've gotten through phase one, you've entered into your second phase, and there's a default by the district. This language is to clarify that the Martin Group, under those set of circumstances, will be entitled to be paid its pro rata share of its pre-development expenses and pre-development fee. There was a lot of discussion about appreciating how much effort will need to be expended by the Martin Group in phase two. Can't do a project like this from preliminary analysis and feasibility to a complete and thorough pre-development services without the Martin Group incurring hundreds of thousands of dollars of expenses. So the idea is that if the district defaults, then the Martin Group needs to be reimbursed pro rata. The next change is page 7. And you'll see toward the end of that, this was just to clarify that the development agreement under Section 6B does include at this point of the process the pre-development fee. So it's been folded into the development fee, and that's the purpose of adding this cross-reference to Section 6B.
Can I ask a question before you move on from that page just above? And this is, so we have an idea where these rates come from under number 7, where it says that the development agreement shall provide for payment to the Martin Group at market rate for construction management services. What's market rate? How do we know what that is?
Market rate, so the development agreement here is a development services agreement. The Martin Group is not the developer, not the contractor. You can think of it more like a project management agreement, project management services, somewhat similar to project management contracts the board's probably seen for some of its bond projects. So there is a standard percentage range for development services. And the development agreement it will be negotiated between the district and the Martin Group based upon what are commonly known institutional best practices in terms of development fee.
So it'll be defined in the development agreement?
Right, exactly. And the fee, rather than being stated now, the fee can change depending upon the type of project and the delivery complexity. Section 9 has been deleted, And originally, Section 9 related to asset management. Asset management wasn't the typical asset management the board may think of in terms of managing its assets on campus. This dealt with the projects built. You've got a project that's been financed by the 501c3 entity under the ground lease. There's been a developer hired to build a project. Project is in service. The 501c3 entity working with the underwriter probably has some operating agreement or occupancy agreement. And the 501c3 on that side of the ground lease as tenant is obviously operating for its best interest. So the idea here was that the asset management would be services that the Martin Group would provide to the district as the district's advocate post-project delivery. Working with district staff, we saw this provision as largely just premature. It doesn't, eliminating this clause doesn't affect or compromise the agreement or the performance of services. So it was removed. Going down the agreement, the next change made is on page 12. So on page 12, the last sentence of section 18 has been deleted. And this was done to clarify that under the pre-development agreement, the district is not paying for the cost of either the Martin Group or its consultants procuring insurance.
Thank you.
So
That
this
was going to be one of my questions, but.
Right. So you took that out anticipating it would be one of your questions. Section 19, this is an important clause because while some may view it as sort of boilerplate because it's the idea of confidential information, not surprisingly, you have a services contract with the Martin Group. You've heard a lot about the projects they've done. There's a lot of information the Martin Group has, a lot of it proprietary, confidential. So it's not unreasonable for a development services company like the Martin Group to want to protect its confidential information. However, it's complicated because Napa Valley College is a public entity. You're subject to the Brown Act. You're subject to the Public Records Act. So the idea here was to draft a confidentiality clause that was fair, even-handed, and making clear, both for the benefit of the trustees and the community, that no information that is required by law to be public and no information that's required for purposes of Brown Act compliance would be sheltered from disclosure because of this provision. So that's why there's lots of markup here, but at the end of the day, there's a Section A, defines confidential information. There's a Section B, and says this is all the exclusions, and you'll see the exclusions identify public meeting agenda requirements, staff reports, Public Records Act, and the Brown Act. So there, again, there's no information that's not going to become available to the public under this document. The next change is in Exhibit C. Excuse me, Exhibit B. This change really was for purposes of just clarifying the mechanism by which this project gets financed. So you'll see the changes in Section G1, and this is really the nuts and bolts of the financing structure. The Martin Group presents an overview of the next phase. Again, this is pre-development, and part of that relates to issuance of the request for proposals from the 501c3 entities and relates to the delivery of the ground lease. So and David's here, and he can talk a lot about the financing aspect of it, but the structure of the project involves the district ground leasing to a 501c3 entity that can then finance the project. So that's what this change is being made here, is to make clear that it's the 501c3 entity that is the tenant under your ground lease that is awarded after the issuance of requests for proposals and an evaluation of those proposals. And then construction doesn't commence until after all of that's been done. And those are the changes to the document. Questions, please.
Start with you again. Do you have additional questions?
No, some of them we're taking care of in the red line.
Okay.
My mistake.
Trustee Segura?
Nice, thank you.
Pablo?
No questions.
Trustee Baker? I don't have any questions after the newest addition either. This is an action item. I would urge the board, I mean, this is a pre-development agreement. We can still decide not to do housing, obviously. We've gone through that, but I would urge everybody to think about this. It's something that's been discussed a long time. We're not the first board to go over it. I don't think we as a state could even build ourselves out of the affordable housing problem, but this is a way of us as the college doing a small part for our community and helping our students that are all living in our community. So that being said, I will.
So move.
I second.
I have a motion on the floor by Trustee Baldini and a second by Trustee Segura. Mr. Orton, you've already had your.
It's a separate item, isn't it?
I did give you the option, but sure, if you have a comment, I'll give you 5 minutes.
I'll make it real quick. I just had a question about some of those clauses. There were times when the college would have approval rights or whatever with consultants, and if that's, or they'd be reviewing them to determine. And my question is, and it's really not for I don't think anybody but staff, and that is, do you plan on hiring independent consultants to help advise you when you're negotiating or conferring? And if so, have you estimated those costs and, what kind of expertise you would need in that? Because I remember, early on, this board said that they would want independent advice. So you just can't be going blindly negotiating with, unless staff has expertise. So it's just a simple question.
I can answer this question. We will continue with our legal consultant and advisors, and also we've spoken with Scion Group, which is staying in the loop, and agreed to consult us as needed moving forward.
Thank you. Did you have something?
The only comment I wanted to make is, excuse me, thank you. So the phrase consultants, sub-consultants, the way to understand where those sub-consultants get involved in the process is to look at Exhibit B related to the services that are being provided for pre-development services, and then the preliminary analysis, and that gives you an idea of what consultants are going to be involved in the project. So for example, under Exhibit C, preliminary analysis, you'll see a reference to civil survey diligence. Civil survey would be hiring a civil engineer, come onto the site, conduct a survey of the property. And that's where, for example, you'd have topographic maps, you'd have floodplains identified. So there is some framework under this document where we know or can anticipate who the consultants are going to be. And then on a case-by-case basis, working with staff, some of these consultants can be vetted just through legal counsel. Some might require staff combination or may need to go outside.
Thank you. I have, again, a motion on the floor by Trustee Baldini, second by Trustee Segura. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. With the recusal of trustee Dodd, the motion carries unanimous. Congratulations, Martin Group, on the pre-development agreement. And congratulations to the rest of the board. This is a big step in the future of the college and providing affordable housing for our students. All right.
Thank you.
At this point, I don't have anything else, so I'm going to close our special board meeting at 6:28. Thank you.